The rain came down in steady sheets, turning the dirt outside the auction barn into a sticky, uneven mess. Trucks lined the gravel lot, their headlights cutting through the misty gray of the morning. Inside, the air carried a weight of sawdust, sweat, and impatience. Voices murmured low as buyers, ranchers, and dealers shifted in their seats, eyes fixed on the animals being herded through the worn wooden gate. One after another, horses were paraded beneath the harsh glow of flickering lights, their hooves clattering against the boards. Numbers were shouted, bids fired back and forth, and papers shuffled as deals were made. But when the next horse appeared, silence fell across the crowd. The animal that entered was thin to the point of fragility. His ribs pressed sharply against a dull, muddy coat. His mane hung in unkempt strands, tangled and broken. A faint limp slowed his steps, every movement a cautious struggle. He blinked against the light, eyes cloudy, distant, yet carrying a flicker of something that hadn't completely died out. A man tugged at the lead rope, irritated by the horse's hesitation. "Next one up." "Lot 57, the auctioneer announced, his voice lacking enthusiasm. "Male, 6 years old, starting at 500. He paused, waiting, eyes moving across the crowd. Not a single hand rose. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the number. Still silence. A cough from the back row. Someone whispered, "Not worth it." Another man muttered, "Too broken down." The horse shifted uneasily, lifting one hind leg as if bracing for a strike. The auctioneer frowned, voice clipped with impatience. "No bids?" "None at all." He tapped the podium sharply, then moved him aside. "Next lot." The handler jerked on the rope, dragging the animal toward the edge of the pen. A wave of indifference passed over the crowd, eyes already shifting to the next horse. Yet not everyone looked away. Near the side of the room, a girl leaned forward in her seat, hands clenched around the edge of the bench. Her gaze fixed on the rejected horse with an intensity that ignored the rest of the spectacle. She was young, no more than 14, with hair pulled back hastily into a braid that had begun to unravel from the rain. Her clothes were simple, worn jeans tucked into muddy boots, a jacket too large for her narrow shoulders. But her eyes carried a brightness that cut through the gloom. She saw something no one else bothered to notice. She turned to the man beside her, her father. His expression was hard, seasoned by years of farm work and disappointments. "Pa," she whispered, barely audible over the buzz of the auctioneer's next call. "That horse," her father shook his head before she could finish. "Forget him. You saw it yourself. Weak. Won't last the winter." His tone left no room for debate, but her gaze refused to waver. The rejected horse stood near the corner of the pen, ears angled back, sides trembling. Mud clung to his legs, and the faint scars across his flank told unspoken stories of neglect. The girl rose quietly, heart pounding in her chest. She stepped closer to the gate, ignoring the looks of curiosity and mild annoyance from those around her. She pressed her small fingers against the railing, watching as the horse's weary eyes lifted to meet hers. For a brief second, the crowded barn seemed to fade. The horse did not retreat. His gaze held hers, wary yet searching, like a creature waiting to see if trust was possible once more. Her father caught the movement, his jaw tightening. "Come back here," he muttered, standing to grip her arm, but she pulled away with unexpected resolve. She raised her hand toward the auctioneer. "We'll take him." Her voice cracked slightly, yet it rang clear across the barn. Heads turned, murmurs rippled. The auctioneer blinked, clearly surprised. "Lot 57, at 500. He studied the girl's father, who rubbed a hand over his face, caught between exasperation and reluctant pride. The man sighed heavily. 200, he called, hoping to end the embarrassment quickly. The auctioneer hesitated, then slammed his hand on the podium. "Sold. Lot 57 for 200. The gavel struck wood, final and echoing. The girl's heart raced, both triumph and fear tangling inside her. She hurried toward the pen as the handler shoved the rope into her father's hands. The horse resisted, pulling back, but she stepped forward slowly, voice gentle. "It's all right," she whispered, though the words were more for herself than him. She reached out cautiously, fingers brushing against his coarse neck. He flinched, muscles stiffening, but didn't pull away completely. She stroked once, tentative yet steady. "I'll take care of you," she said, barely audible, her breath mingling with the horse's uneven exhale. Her father watched with a mix of disbelief and resignation. "You better know what you're getting into," he said gruffly. That one's nothing but work. No reward. But the girl barely heard him. Her world had shrunk to the space between her palm and the horse's trembling skin. She felt the faint rhythm of his heartbeat beneath layers of fear and frailty. In that fragile rhythm, she heard a promise not yet spoken. Together, they walked toward the trailer waiting outside. Each step was halting, awkward. The horse balked at the ramp, eyes wide at the dark space inside. Rain tapped steadily against the metal roof, echoing like distant thunder. The girl placed her hand against his cheek, whispering steady words. One step at a time. I won't let go. Slowly, hesitantly, he obeyed, hooves clanging as he entered. She followed close, never breaking contact, her small frame a shield against his fear. When the ramp closed, the father climbed into the truck cab with a weary sigh. You'll regret this, he muttered under his breath, though not loud enough for her to hear. She stood beside the trailer, water dripping from her braid, heart heavy yet alive with determination. Through the slats, she caught the horse's eye once more. He stood in the shadows, silent but not defeated. She pressed her palm against the cold metal. Your name will come later, she whispered. First, we get you home. The truck engine roared to life, pulling away from the lot. Behind them, the auction continued without pause. Another horse paraded out, another set of bids exchanged. But for the girl, the world had shifted. She didn't know the battles ahead or the cost of her choice. All she knew was that in the middle of rejection and dismissal, she had seen a spark worth saving. And now, whether her father liked it or not, she carried the weight of a promise, a fragile bond that demanded courage she hadn't known she possessed. The rain blurred the windows as the trailer swayed behind, carrying both a broken horse and the first steps of a story neither of them could yet imagine. The drive home stretched long, the rain softening to a mist that blurred the passing fields into shades of gray and green. Inside the trailer, the horse shifted uneasily, the sound of hooves against metal a reminder of his unease. The girl sat pressed against the window, eyes fixed on the shadowy shape barely visible through the slats. Her father's hands gripped the steering wheel, his silence heavy. At last he said, he'll be more trouble than he's worth. His voice was low, matter-of-fact, yet tinged with a faint edge of concern. She didn't answer. Words felt too fragile. Instead, she whispered inwardly, promising that the journey had only just begun. When they reached the farm, dusk had already fallen, painting the sky in muted streaks of purple and fading gold. The barn loomed tall, weathered boards groaning with the wind. The girl hurried to open the trailer, her boots slipping in the mud. The horse hesitated, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the unfamiliar air. His legs quivered, but she stood at his side, hand resting lightly on the rope. Come on, she murmured, her voice soft, coaxing. The world was silent except for the rustle of leaves and the low croak of frogs near the pond. Slowly, haltingly, the horse lowered one hoof, then another, until he stood on the damp ground of his new home. She led him into the barn, its dim lantern glow casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Dust swirled in the air as the door shut behind them. He balked at the smell of hay and the echo of his own hooves, pulling back, muscles tight. She steadied herself, refusing to tug. It's just a stall, she whispered. Safe here. The stall door creaked open, straw fresh and golden inside. After a tense pause, he stepped in, ears twitching. She slid the rope free and watched him circle, restless but contained. Relief settled in her chest, though it was tinged with worry. This was only the beginning. That night, she barely slept. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while the sound of wind rattled the shutters. Each creak made her wonder if he was still there, if he would bolt or collapse. At dawn, she was already running across the dew-soaked grass, heart pounding with anticipation. He stood where she had left him, sides heaving gently as he turned his head to watch her approach. His eyes were no longer dulled by auction lights, but cautious, searching. She carried a bucket of water and a handful of grain. The moment she entered, his ears flattened, hooves shifting nervously. She set the bucket down slowly, retreating a step. It's yours, she said, voice trembling. He sniffed the grain, snorted, and turned away. Disappointment stung her, but she refused to retreat entirely. Instead, she sat just outside the stall, knees tucked beneath her chin, waiting in silence. Hours passed before the soft crunch of grain broke the stillness. She smiled faintly, the sound like music. Days blurred together in a rhythm of effort and patience. Morning after morning, she brought food, water, and quiet company. Sometimes he ignored her. Sometimes he turned his back, head low. Yet she returned without fail. At night, she brushed dirt from her jeans, her hands raw from chores, but her resolve never wavered. Her father watched, saying little, though his disapproving glances carried the weight of unspoken warnings. Neighbors who stopped by offer harsher words. "That horse is a lost cause," one said with a laugh. "You'll waste more feed than he's worth." She bit back her anger, choosing silence, though inside her determination grew sharper. She saw more than bones and scars. She saw the possibility of healing. Progress came slowly, measured in moments, so small most would have missed them. The first time he allowed her hand to linger on his neck, without flinching. The first time he nibbled an apple from her palm. Each gesture was fragile, like glass, but each carried the weight of victory. She began to call him Shadow, the name forming naturally, as if it had always belonged to him. "You follow me like one," she explained softly, brushing his mane in the dim light. He flicked his ears, not understanding the words, but sensing the gentleness in them. The bond between them thickened with each passing day, invisible yet undeniable. Still, not all was steady. There were setbacks that tested her resolve. One morning, a sudden storm sent the barn doors banging open, the wind howling. Shadow panicked, rearing violently, eyes rolling white. He slammed against the stall, hooves striking wood. She rushed forward, arms outstretched, voice breaking through the chaos. "It's all right. I'm here." He stopped, sides heaving, sweat streaking his coat. She stood pressed against the stall door, heart racing. In that moment, she understood just how fragile trust was, how easily it could shatter. Yet she also saw that her voice, her presence, had been enough to anchor him. It gave her strength she hadn't known she possessed. The weeks stretched into months. Slowly, she introduced him to the fields. At first, he balked at the open space, as though freedom itself was unfamiliar. She walked beside him, step for step, the lead rope loose in her hand. When he stopped, she stopped. When he advanced, she followed. It was a dance of patience, each movement deliberate, each breath shared. By the third week, he lowered his head to graze while she sat nearby, reading aloud from a worn book. He didn't understand the words, but the sound of her voice carried a peace that no whip or harsh hand could ever command. Her father observed from the porch, arms folded across his chest. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, he spoke at last. "You're pouring your heart into him. But remember, a horse isn't just a pet. He needs to prove his worth one day." His words stung, not from cruelty, but from the weight of truth. She turned to him, chin lifted. "Worth isn't always about winning something," she said. He gave no reply, only a weary shake of his head, before retreating inside. Yet his silence planted a seed of doubt in her mind, a shadow lingering beside her newfound hope. That night, as she brushed Shadow's coat beneath the lantern glow, her thoughts wandered to her father's warning. She pressed her forehead gently against the horse's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body against her own. "We'll show them," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. "Not because we have to, but because we can." Shadow shifted slightly, lowering his head, as if to listen. His breath warmed her cheek, a silent promise in return. For the first time, she imagined a future where he wasn't just surviving, but thriving, a future where the bond they were building might stand against any doubt. The night settled heavy and still, the barn quiet except for the sound of his slow breathing. She lingered a moment longer, reluctant to leave, her hand trailing along his mane. Each stroke was a vow, each whisper a thread weaving them together. Outside, the stars pressed against the dark sky, endless and watchful. She stepped into the cool night, closing the barn door behind her, heart steady. The journey was far from over. Ahead lay challenges neither of them could yet see, but the foundation had been laid. She had chosen him when no one else would. Now together, they would face whatever waited beyond the horizon. Word count, 1,000 white heavy check mark. The air grew warmer as spring unfurled across the farm, yet tension lingered in the spaces between quiet victories. Shadow's ribs no longer showed as sharply, and his coat, though still rough, glimmered faintly beneath the sun. The girl worked tirelessly, her hands roughened by brushes and ropes, her boots stained with mud and hay. Each day their connection deepened, yet beneath the surface of progress, fragility lingered. Trust could build, but it could also break, and she was beginning to learn how delicate that balance truly was. One evening, as shadows stretched across the barn, she tried leading him farther from the familiar stalls, out toward the pasture. At first, he followed willingly, ears flicking as he sniffed the fresh air. Then, with no warning, something in the distance cracked, a branch snapping, a sudden crow's cry. Shadow froze, muscles taut, eyes wide with a terror that came from somewhere buried deep. He yanked against the rope, breaking free with a force that sent her stumbling into the dirt. Panic turned him into a storm of hooves and fear. He bolted across the field, sides lathered in sweat, crashing against the fence until splinters flew. Her father rushed from the porch, shouting, "Get back!" But she didn't listen. She scrambled to her feet, voice raw. "Shadow, it's me." The horse spun wildly, foam spraying from his mouth, nostrils flared. His eyes, wide and rolling, carried a memory she could not see but felt, the unmistakable weight of past cruelty. She stepped forward, ignoring her father's warning cry, ignoring the sting of fear in her chest. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her hands. "It's over," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you now." Her voice quivered, yet it carried something steady, a tether in the storm. Shadow's ears twitched, his legs still shaking, but he stilled enough for her to approach. She laid a trembling hand against his neck. His breath shuddered out, uneven but slowing. Tears pricked her eyes as she pressed her forehead against him. "You're safe. With me, you're safe." When she finally led him back, her father's expression was grim, his silence heavy with judgment. That night, she sat alone in the barn, stroking Shadow's mane as sleep refused to come. The image of his panic haunted her, gnawing at her determination. For the first time, she realized healing wasn't a straight path. His past was carved into him, scars that no tenderness could erase overnight. Yet rather than discourage her, the realization made her resolve deepen. If he carried a history of pain, then she would meet it with persistence. She would not give up where others had turned away. The following week, an older man arrived at the farm. His name was Garrett, a neighbor and horseman whose reputation carried weight in the small town. He leaned against the fence, watching as the girl worked patiently with Shadow. His voice was calm, weathered by years. "You've got a strong heart, kid. But heart alone isn't enough. You'll need patience, skill, and a bit of luck." Her father, standing nearby, nodded. "Told her she's wasting her time. Maybe she'll listen to you." But Garrett shook his head. "I don't see wasted time. I see a start." He looked at her, eyes steady. "He's not broken, just scared. If you give him space, he'll come to you. Forcing trust never works. You earn it one heartbeat at a time." His words struck her with the force of truth. From that day on, she adjusted her approach. She stopped rushing, stopped expecting milestones. Instead, she learned to wait. Sometimes she simply sat in the grass as Shadow grazed nearby, letting him choose the distance. Sometimes she read aloud while he circled, his ears flicking toward her voice. Little by little, his steps grew steadier. One morning, to her astonishment, he walked toward her without coaxing, lowering his head against her shoulder. The moment was so pure, it left her breathless. She whispered his name again, this time with absolute certainty. "Shadow." With Garrett's guidance, she began teaching Shadow to carry weight. The first attempts were hesitant. A saddle placed too quickly made him buck, fear exploding into resistance. But Garrett showed her how to break the process into fragments, laying the blanket across his back, waiting until he calmed, then lifting it off again. Each step was repeated, day after day, until fear was replaced with tolerance, then familiarity. The girl learned as much as Shadow did. She discovered that gentleness paired with patience had a strength far greater than force. The first time she sat on his back, he trembled beneath her, legs stiff, ears pinned. Her own pulse raced, fear and exhilaration colliding. She whispered constantly, each word a thread of reassurance. "It's just us. Just us." Shadow snorted, shifted, then finally stilled. Her father watched from the fence, his face unreadable. Garrett, arms folded, gave a small nod of approval. The ride lasted less than a minute, but to her it was triumph. That night, lying in bed, she replayed the sensation over and over, the feeling of trust solidifying, fragile but real. But trust was always tested. One afternoon, while leading Shadow through the pasture, she encountered a group of local boys leaning against the fence. They snickered, one calling out, "That's the half-dead thing you bought? Should have let the wolves take him." Their laughter was sharp, cutting through the calm. Her cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. He's stronger than you think. Their smirks widened. Prove it. Enter him in the county show. She faltered, the challenge catching her off guard. The boys walked away still laughing, but the words lingered, burrowing into her thoughts. That evening, her father brought it up before she could. They're right, you know. If you want people to see he's worth all this effort, you'll have to show them. Otherwise, he'll never be more than a burden. She stared at him, heart pounding. The idea frightened her, putting Shadow in front of a crowd, exposing him to judgment. Yet somewhere beneath the fear lay a spark. Maybe this was what they needed. Proof. Not for the neighbors. Not even for her father. For Shadow. For herself. She went to the barn, lantern light flickering against the wooden beams. Shadow lifted his head as she entered, his dark eyes calm, steady. She stroked his neck, fingers brushing the scars hidden beneath his coat. They don't believe in you, she whispered. But I do. And one day, they'll see what I see. He exhaled warm breath against her cheek, and for the first time, she felt not just a fragile bond, but a partnership forming. The days that followed became focused, each hour devoted to preparing him for challenges ahead. She practiced leading him calmly past distractions, dogs barking, buckets clanging, sudden movements. Each success bolstered her hope. Each failure tested her patience. But she never wavered. In the quiet moments, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in fire, she dreamed of the day they would stand in a ring, not as a rejected horse and a foolish girl, but as something more, proof that second chances mattered. One evening, as the crickets sang and the sky darkened into velvet, she leaned against Shadow's stall, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. We're not ready yet, she admitted softly, but we will be. He lowered his head toward her shoulder, the weight of it both grounding and reassuring. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. Ahead, challenges loomed, competition, doubt, the risk of failure. Yet in that moment, beneath the lantern's glow, she felt certain of one truth. Whatever trials awaited, they would face them together. Morning broke clear and cool, the sun spilling over the horizon in a wash of gold. The girls stood at the barn door, staring at the fields beyond as a knot of nerves tightened in her chest. Today was the day. The county show had loomed in her thoughts for weeks, both a promise and a threat. She glanced at Shadow, who stood quietly in his stall, his dark coat brushed until it gleamed, scars softened by time and care. His ears flicked toward her, sensing the weight of her emotions. She stepped closer, pressing her forehead against his cheek. "It's just another field," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Just you and me. That's all." The drive to the fairgrounds seemed longer than any journey before. The trailer rattled, the roads winding through stretches of farmland that smelled of tilled earth and fresh grass. Her father drove in silence, the lines on his face etched deeper by the morning light. When they pulled into the gravel lot, the sound of laughter, music, and restless animals filled the air. Horses gleamed like polished statues, their riders dressed in crisp jackets, polished boots shining. Shadow shifted in the trailer, uneasy at the unfamiliar clamor. The girl's stomach knotted tighter. Compared to the others, he looked plain, even fragile. Yet when she met his eyes through the slats, she saw the same steady spark that had drawn her to him months before. She led him down the ramp, her hands steady though her heart raced. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they passed. "That's the one from the auction, isn't it?" someone muttered. Another scoffed, barely looked strained. She heard every word, but instead of flinching, she drew closer to Shadow's side, her voice low and sure. "Ignore them. We know who we are." He tossed his head, snorting as though echoing her resolve. In the waiting ring, she adjusted the saddle, fingers trembling as she tightened the girth. Shadow shifted beneath her touch, but didn't bolt, his trust holding firm. Garrett appeared at the rail, his weathered face calm. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying across the din, "it's not about perfection. It's about trust. Ride with your heart and he'll follow." She nodded, swallowing hard, the words settling like anchors in her chest. The announcer's voice boomed across the grounds, calling riders into the arena. The crowd roared as competitors entered, their horses prancing with practiced elegance. When her name was finally spoken, the world seemed to fall silent around her. She guided Shadow forward, her hands gentle on the reins. The noise of the crowd swelled again, but all she heard was the rhythm of Shadow's hooves against the packed earth. He faltered at the entrance, ears pinned back at the echoing applause. She leaned forward, whispering, "It's all right. Just breathe with me." Slowly, cautiously, he stepped inside. The course stretched ahead, jumps, tight turns, and obstacles that tested both rider and horse. Her throat tightened. It was more daunting than she had imagined. The first jump loomed, simple yet sharp, and for a heartbeat she thought he might refuse. But she softened her grip, gave him his head, and urged him gently forward. His muscles coiled, then released. They sailed over together, the air rushing past in a moment of pure flight. The crowd gasped, some in surprise, others in reluctant admiration. She grinned despite herself, a tear slipping free. "That's it, Shadow. We can do this." Each obstacle came with its own trial. At one sharp turn, he stumbled, nearly unseating her, but she steadied him with soft words. At another jump, he balked, hooves skidding in the dirt, but she circled back, patient, giving him the chance to try again. When he cleared it on the second attempt, cheers broke from unexpected corners of the crowd. She felt the shift, the disbelief turning into awe. Every stride, every leap was a story unfolding, not of a perfect horse and rider, but of two broken souls choosing to rise. The final challenge loomed ahead, the tallest jump on the course. Shadow slowed, his body tense, memories of fear flickering in his eyes. She could feel his hesitation ripple through the reins. The crowd hushed, sensing the moment. Her father leaned forward in the stands, hands clenched tightly together. Garrett's gaze was fixed, unblinking. The girl bent low over Shadow's neck, her voice breaking with emotion. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to be afraid. We'll do it together." For a heartbeat, he stood frozen. Then, with a surge of strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep within, Shadow lunged forward. They soared, higher than she thought possible, clearing the rail with room to spare. The arena erupted in applause, cheers crashing like waves. She landed lightly, breathless, tears streaming freely now. Shadow tossed his head, a proud snort breaking through the din. For the first time, he seemed to believe what she had always known, that he was not broken, not worthless, but extraordinary. When the round ended, they didn't win first place. The ribbons went to polished riders with flawless scores. Yet when she guided Shadow from the arena, the crowd rose to their feet. The applause wasn't for perfection. It was for courage, for the transformation they had witnessed. Her father met her at the gate, eyes glassy. He reached up, resting a rough hand on Shadow's neck. "I was wrong," he said simply, his voice thick. "He's worth more than I ever imagined." The girl smiled through her tears, unable to speak. The moment said more than words ever could. That evening, back at the farm, the air was cool and quiet, the sky streaked with fading light. She led Shadow into the pasture, removing the bridle, so he could graze freely. He lingered near her instead, nudging her shoulder with his muzzle. She laughed softly, resting her forehead against his. "We did it," she whispered. "Not for them. For us." He exhaled, warm breath mingling with hers, and she felt the bond between them settle, like roots deep in the earth. The house lights flickered on in the distance, her father's silhouette visible on the porch. Garrett's words echoed in her mind. Trust was not forced, but earned, heartbeat by heartbeat. Tonight, she understood them fully. Shadow had chosen to believe again, and she had chosen to fight for him. Together, they had rewritten the story that began with rejection. As darkness fell and the stars bloomed overhead, she lingered in the field, her hand resting on Shadow's neck. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. More challenges, more doubts, but the uncertainty no longer frightened her. What mattered was clear. They had each other. That was enough. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint echoes of the day's applause. She closed her eyes, holding on to the memory, letting it settle into her bones. And then, with a quiet smile, she whispered into the night, "If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day."